Okay, so for this week, we are going to be covering chapter 14 and 15. And you can kind of see the rest of the schedule. We only have a couple of chapters left. So that's kind of good news, because then we get into the case, which you'll be doing. And I will talk about the midterm at the end after we cover the material for this week.
Hey, Linda, I just have a quick question about that schedule there that you showed.
Yep.
So for the stuff that we had to download from Moodle and put in our Citrix, there was nothing for chapter 14. It just went to chapter 12 and then chapter 15. So
if you look at chapter 14, does it say you're starting something from scratch? I can't remember which chapter's which, so that could be the case, just like when you did chapter 7, there was nothing.
Okay, so chapter 14 is like that as well?
Well, I don't know. I just have to check that because I haven't. I don't remember which chapter's which, but you can look at the beginning of the chapter and it'll tell you right off the bat whether you have to open something or not.
There is a file that we're supposed to open for chapter 14. It's called sound.
And do you see it there, Ryan?
There is a file for chapter 14 we're supposed to open. It's called sound 1.
Is it available in Moodle though? Because when I checked a few days ago, there was nothing for chapter 14. And there's nothing for chapter 18 or 19 either, I don't think.
There's nothing there for Moodle for chapter 14. It's there's no file there at all.
Yeah, I'll have to make a note because I didn't create the Moodle site. It's the course coordinator that had it. So you're missing. I'm not in Moodle right now. So you're missing chapter 14 and which other ones?
Chapter 18.
Chapter 18, but 19's there?
No.
I don't know. Do we need something for chapter 19 or is it a case that we're doing on our own? Because no, there's nothing for chapter 19 either. It just goes chapter 12, chapter 15, and that's it in Moodle.
Okay. No, 19 is a chapter in the textbook too. I have to look to see. So yeah, I'll look at that after we're done class here and just see if I can get those onto Moodle, because I'm not sure why they wouldn't be there. That's very odd.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for pointing that out, because that's a strange thing because everything else was there. So Ryan, where did you see are you just saying in the textbook it told you that there is one?
Well, yeah, it says the very first instruction is open Sage data 19 /sound/sound. So
yeah, okay.
There's supposed to be some kind of file to open. It's not a start from scratch, because like in chapter 7, it told you to start a fresh company.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I see it. It's on page 552. I just had to find the right page, open the data files and set up the budget for sound.
And then I don't know if this matters or not, but chapter 18 and 19 are in part 3, the advanced premium features, not in part 2, like everything else is. So that, I don't know if that's why or not, because we haven't really been doing any of the advanced premium feature stuff.
Yeah, maybe that's why. I'm not sure. That's odd. I'll have to look into it using through the course coordinator to see why, because I don't actually know the answer to that. So I will go to the course coordinator and just find out if that is what's going on. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's in a different part of the I don't know what to say. Usually if you had a printed text, you have a CD where you could get the files, but then that's a different process. So I have that CD, so I can get the files from there if I need to, I think, if they don't have them somewhere else. But anyway, I'll look at that afterwards, but thanks for sharing that as well. Okay, and I put the helpline in there again for people on the email, because not this past weekend, but the one after, Citrix was completely down, as you guys know. And I don't know if had any of you contacted IT to find out that in advance of noticing it didn't work?
Yeah, I did. And as soon as they got the email, they rectified it, and then they sent me an email back.
Fantastic. So that's why I put it here again, just in case that happens ever again. Thanks for doing that, Ryan, because obviously that is a huge issue for people. If you can't access the apps, then you have to do that. That was my issue when I first tried to go into Citrix as well. And I have to, just so you know, when I'm marking, I have to download all your files as well to be able to review them. So it was an issue for me as well. So yeah, and again, I just wanted to comment, practice in Sage is the most efficient way to learn, which I already talked about. But Chapter 14, let's start with this. First thing that we're going to learn how to do is turn on the budgeting feature and when you're doing the textbook. And that's because a lot of companies don't use budgeting. So it's not going to be something that's automated where you always have it available in Sage. A lot of companies, well, some unfortunately don't do any budgets at all, right? They just run their business and hope things are good. But after they have some history, hopefully they start doing budgets and looking at how they're planning to do, because then we can actually put in the budget to Sage, and then we can also allocate the budget to revenue and expense accounts. So that's kind of nice. And we're going to show some other things where we can even allocate budgets to different departments. If we had departments set up in Sage, which is an advanced feature we haven't covered yet, but it's in a later chapter. And we can also allocate budget amounts throughout the year, which is kind of nice. So for example, if you knew that you had insurance and your insurance company says it's $2,000 a year, and you're not really sure if you're going to be paying monthly or whatever, but you just want to get the $2,000 a year in, and it doesn't matter really when you're going to pay it, because from an accounting perspective with matching, obviously we want to do it either as a prepaid if we pay in advance, or we want to have an equal amount monthly, obviously, right? So you could allocate your budget monthly in Sage, so that makes it easier. And Quebec is a thing that has sales tax separately, but that's not something we worry about too much in Alberta. And then we obviously can, the benefit of doing the budget in Sage is we can actually display and print our income statement and have a budget comparison. So a lot of companies have bonuses based on performance according to plan, which is their budget. So if you could print a report that shows how you're doing monthly, so that you could see, hey, sales is a little too low, I need to sell more to get my bonus, that kind of thing. But by the end of the year, maybe you could catch up to get your bonus, right? So that's the budget thing. And also you could just manage expenses as well, or any other things you need to manage if you have the budget there. And then the chapter also shows you how to analyze the reports and print invoices in batches. So how do you set up a budget in Sage? This is one thing that when I first was looking at budgeting, because I've never done a budget in Sage, I was like, oh, where would you go? If I was just trying to find it on my own, I would have thought it would have been in company, like a company does a budget. But because our budgets are done by GL account, you'll find the budget in the general account menu. So if you go into settings, as I've highlighted on the screen there, and then you go into general account, then there's budget. And all you have to do is check the box, which I've highlighted there, where it's checked. It says budget, revenue, and expense account. And then the budget period frequency you can select. And many companies will do it monthly. That's the best way to do it. So just so that you can actually see as you go how you're doing. If you wait and do it, say, yearly, it's a little too late to fix anything if things are going wrong. Some people will do it quarterly, etc. So it just depends on the business that you're working in on how they'll do it. So I already talked about the fact that you can do budgets in different ways, like you can allocate by month, but some companies will do it maybe by season. So for example, if you had a busy season where, Christmas Day, you're a retail business and you have a whole bunch more revenue, let's say in November and December, maybe those budgets have a higher sales amount and then the rest is sort of a fixed amount. So if you look in the example in the textbook on page 555, Sound Inc. has the same amounts for October and November. So when you were doing your budget for October, November, they're the same. And when you have the same monthly amounts, instead of typing them in multiple times, you can use copy and paste. And if you don't know the keyboard shortcuts for that, it's Control. If you hit your Control button and at the same time hit the C after you've highlighted the amount, that will put it on your clipboard. And then when you go where you want to enter it. So for example, if you had $1,000 in September, you would highlight that, go Control C, click on October if it was the same, and go Control V to paste that amount in there. And especially if it was the same for multiple months, that could save you tons and tons of time. Now, if it was a fixed amount and you wanted it equal for the entire year, you can see I've highlighted the total budgeted amount here in this slide. And if I put in $1,000 there, let's say for something, this is sales drywall. Now, say 1,000 would be maybe way too low, but let's say I put in, I think my sales are going to be 100,000, and let's say my sales were equal for the entire year. I could just say allocate to period, and it would automatically put the budget in for all of the months. Now, if I go allocate to department, it would then take it further and allocate it to all these 3 departments. Now, in this company's case, there's an administration department, a marketing department, and a construction and engineering. So obviously we wouldn't want to allocate sales to all the departments because it would only be for the construction department. And again, we haven't learned departments yet, so I'm just showing this because it is part of the budgeting feature. But for now, when you're doing budgets, you would just have one budget number for sales for drywall. If this was your company, you would put in the amount for the budget each month as it said in the example. If it was an equal amount and you wanted to split it, you could do that. But the textbook, for example, for this chapter actually shows you their budget for each particular month. So basically, to enter a budget, you're going into the general ledger account, clicking the budget tab. So the budget tab, you can see this is the general ledger that I'm in. You click this budget tab, and then you just make sure this account is checked. And if that's checked, then you're able to enter your budget. If this is not checked, there would be no budget for this particular account. And some companies may only budget certain types of accounts. And so that's why there's the option to do this in each general ledger account you have. Now, most times you're going to see that companies you work in, often they'll budget the income statement, but they may not do a balance sheet budget. So that's fairly common in most businesses I've worked, where the income statement's budgeted, where the balance sheet is not. Now, in some cases, your company might budget for certain balance sheet accounts. So when I worked at a bank, for example, they would budget the amount of loans from their clients as well as the amounts of deposits, because that was their cash flow. And so they would budget certain accounts like that, but not the rest of the accounts. So it's just depending on what you're using. Now, one other thing to note is that if you're entering a million budget accounts, so if you look, for example, on page 555 of the textbook for sound, you can see there's the whole income statement budget. So there's tons of accounts. There's revenue from sales, service, delivery, discounts, investment revenue, interest. Then there's all of their expenses. And they have a column for September. Then they have a column for October, November, which means everything is the same for those 2 months, which is where you're going to use your copy and paste. December, January is the same. February to June is all the same. And then they have a separate budget for July and for August of 2022. And then they give you the total for 12 months. But because there's so many different things to enter in here, it's easy to make a mistake, right? Like if you, for example, you're copying things for December to January and you accidentally copy one into February that's a different amount, obviously things won't balance. So what you want to make sure you do is print your budget report to check your data entry for your entire budget. So once you're done, print the report, check it, and then go in and correct anything that's incorrect. And that's the same as what we do for anything else that we're doing data entry on, just because it is common to make some mistakes. So any questions so far on the budget process? No? Okay. So then getting into chapter 15. So in this chapter, we're actually doing bank deposit slips, talking about bank accounts, comparing bank statements with transaction reports. We're also going to turn on the account reconciliation feature. And this is where we can actually do bank recs, for example. There's other recs you can do also. But if you were doing if you have a bank account, if you remember from taking your accounting classes, you would have to you would do a bank reconciliation every month, right? So you would go in, you would look at your bank statement, you'd see that the balance is a certain amount. You would go into your general ledger for cash and realize it's different for many reasons that we're going to talk about. So if we do a bank rec in Sage, it allows us to basically automate the process. So if you are thinking back to your accounting class where you learned bank recs, you might have had a printout of a bank statement and a printout of the general ledger, and you would use a highlighter to highlight all the amounts that match. And then anything left over is something you had to do in the bank rec. Does anyone remember doing that, where you had to actually do a bank rec, highlighting amounts and going through and looking at, the differences? Jerome's saying yes. So the good thing about Sage is that you can check off things that match. And when they match, you don't really have to do anything. And then Sage is going to prepare the reconciliation for us, as long as we do it right. So you'll see, I'll show some examples of the screens and what they're going to look like. But basically, at the end of the day, if you reconcile and there's no unreconciled differences, your bank rec is stored directly in Sage. You don't have to do anything manually. We're also going to learn how to reverse receipts for NSF checks and display and print account rec reports and clear paid invoices and remove accounts. That's the other things that are covered in this particular chapter. So some warnings, and this is a key one, and this took me some time when I first started using Sage. I started using it for my rental business, and I hadn't taught this class at the time. I hadn't taken a class on Sage at all. And what I realized is I was entering things for bank transfers. That was my example that I found. I went to do a bank transfer where I was moving money from one account to the other, and I made a mistake. I did it backwards actually in one example, and it was because it doesn't show debits and credits. It's like in and out. And if you do it wrong, you'd think in Sage, most things, whenever you make a mistake, you can go back in the same screen, hit the pen and do an edit, right? That's what we've done for payables. That's what we've done for receivables, etc. Right? So it's very easy to do. However, for the banking module, it is different. We cannot edit a deposit slip, an account rec, or a bank transfer after posting unless we went to edit the posted journal entry. So that is completely different than any other module. So what you would do is you would not be going in. For example, if you're doing a bank transfer, you could go into a journal entry and debit and credit the different accounts, but there is a system to do bank transfers right in Sage. For an account rec, you're not going in for a bank rec and doing a journal entry because that would be kind of silly. Then you'd have to do the whole bank rec manually, do your highlighting, figure out your journal entry like you did in accounting before, and you'd go, okay, I need to debit bank charges and I need to credit interest revenue, etc. And that would be just doing it manually, which because Sage allows us to do the account rec automatically, what it'll do for us if we've reconciled it correctly is it will create the journal entry that we need. So, for example, it will debit bank charges, it will credit interest revenue, it'll do all the things that we would want to do in our journal entry. But if we make a mistake or we do something wrong and we post the account rec, we can't go back in and fix it through the account rec screen. What we would have to do is we'd have to go to the posted journal entry, look for that journal entry from the rec that was posted and go, okay, oops, we messed up and we posted bank service charges of 100 and it should have been 80. Well, if you had done it wrong, your rec wouldn't work. It would say unreconciled difference, but to fix it, you can't go back in and fix it. You have to go into the journal entry itself. And that is very complicated. So what the better process to do is, and it talks about this in the textbook, is if you're about to do a bank rec, which is a long process and it's quite complex sometimes, what you want to do is do a backup of your Sage file before you start the rec. And you can even just call this, backup page, whatever page in the textbook it is, before bank rec. If you do that and you do the rec by accident, something happens and you accidentally post it with a mistake, you could restore from your backup and restart over at that point, and without having to restart the entire chapter. So I don't know if anyone's done that ever in a chapter where you've done a backup and you've went back, not to the beginning of the chapter to start over, but just to start over with one little thing. Most times you don't have to do that because you can just edit using the pen. And Ryan's saying he has done that. So that's good. So backups, the textbook often tells you when to do it. You should definitely do it weekly, at least once you've entered things. So in this case, though, this is an extra time that I'm talking about. Even if the textbook doesn't tell you to do a backup, let's say it's in the middle, like normally this would be at month end that you do the bank rec, right? But regardless of that, I would just always recommend doing a backup so that you can then go back to fix it at the end. Now, the other thing you can do, though, is don't post it until it's balanced. Then obviously you have no issue. And let's say it's balanced and after you balance your bank rec, you post the journal entry, and you realize something was wrong. And of course, like let's just say, for example, you used the wrong account. You posted something to bank service charges, and that wasn't a bank service charge. It was actually a automatic payment to somebody that was, I don't know, a repair company, just let's say that. And you thought you didn't know what it was. And at the time you just posted it somewhere that was incorrect. And then you realize afterwards, oh shoot, that wasn't a charge from the bank. It was a charge from a company that was automatically taking money out of our account. To do that correction, I wouldn't go back and do my whole bank rec again. I would simply go in and do a journal entry, taking it out of bank service charges, putting it in the correct account, which in the case I gave was repairs. So you can always do corrections through journal entries. It's just that you want to make sure for sure that your bank rec balances before you post. The other thing is deposit slips. So if you're doing a deposit slip, you also want to review that entry before you post it. So when you're going into a deposit slip, go into the report menu, go into the button that says display deposit slip journal entry, and then you can look at it, you can compare what it's doing to the solution and make a correction before you post it. And a deposit slip, basically, to just explain what this is if I'm in a company and I'm collecting money as customers come in and make payments, I'm not going to the bank every day to make a deposit. Typically, companies, depending on how many checks and cash, how much cash and how many checks they get, they might go weekly to the bank, they might go daily, they might go bi-weekly. But what's going to happen is for accounting, we want to enter things on the day they happen, but we're not going to deposit the money in the bank until we go to the bank to do it. So let's say, for example, we collect some money on Monday and we post it into Sage. We also collect it on Tuesday, post it into Sage. Then Wednesday, maybe we go to the bank to do the deposit. We are going to create this deposit slip for Wednesday of all the deposits, all the stuff we've collected through those other days to go to the bank, right? And we want to make sure that reconciles, because the total deposit that we take to our bank has to match what we're depositing in Sage. Now, I already talked about the fact that you have to have, like when you're doing a bank rec, there will be a journal entry created for you where it debits bank service charges, it credits interest revenue automatically. Well, how it does that is through linked accounts, and those need to be set up before you do a reconciliation. So the example of doing that is on page 586 of the text. So basically it'll say, where do you want to put bank service charges? And you specify which GL account. Where do you want to put interest revenue? You specify the account. And that's how, when you're doing the rec, Sage knows where to post those amounts to. So any questions on those warnings? Don't see anything coming up, so we'll keep going here. So this is an example of a bank rec. So these are the screens you're going to see in Sage or in the textbook. So the first screen is from Sage. It's the bank account transactions report. So that's the one on the left here. So you can see account 1060, the bank checking account. You could see there's debits and credits like we would expect to see, obviously. You could see the beginning balance in the bank there, and you could see the ending balance there as well, right? So everyone sees that. And obviously, if you look here and you look at the ending balance in the Sage system compared to the bank statement itself, which is on the right, they are not the same. So it's about 47,000 in the bank itself, and in Sage it's 51,000. So you can see there's a difference. But if you look, you kind of look, you can see there's a 6,000 debit here, and you can see in the bank there is a deposit of 6,000 here, right? So you can see there's some things that match, but everything, not everything. So here's the 926.10, there's the 926.10, there's the 330 and the 330, and you can keep going through, but you're gonna notice some things are missing. So there's a bank deposit here on January 31st, just over 2,000. Do you see that here as a bank deposit? And the answer is no, right? So the problem is there's many things that we have to account for in our rec. So what things are those? Let's go through what the differences would be. So differences from the statement arise from outstanding checks. So we wrote out a check, let's say we did a check run on January 31st. Well, nobody's probably cashed those checks yet. They haven't cleared our bank. So those are outstanding. And the deposit I just showed on the last screen, if it wasn't deposited yet because we didn't go to the bank, or even maybe we did go to the bank and we put it in the NAIT deposit box, so it's not going to be recorded in our bank till maybe February 1st or even 2nd, depending if it's a weekend, etc. It could be a few days before that deposit shows up in your bank statement. Interest revenue, obviously that we wouldn't have known about till we get our bank statement, so we'd be booking that. Same thing with bank service charges. And there's also some automatic payments. So we might have some vendors that are automatically taking money out of our bank account. Often that's the case for utility companies, landlords sometimes can do that. So if you have those, you're going to enter those through, you're going to see that those aren't in the GL yet, and you would see them on the bank statement. Now, if they're the same amount every month, then we might have a recurring entry to post it. So it is already in there and we're just matching it up. But if it's a different amount, we'd be waiting till we get our bank statement to then enter it. The other thing that might result in a difference is an error. Sometimes it's an error from the bank, and sometimes it's an error in data entry. So if we had a payment for, let's say it's an automatic payment, and we thought it was $50, that's what it typically is, and we recorded that. But in this case, for whatever reason, the amount went up and it's now 55, that would be an error where we have to correct our entry to have it as $55 instead of the 50 that we posted. So if there's an error in our data entry, we need to fix that through a journal entry. What about if it's an error by the bank? Do we make an adjustment in our general ledger? What do you guys think? Anyone have an answer for that? Do you guys remember from account recs in accounting what you do if it's an error from the bank? No, nobody's putting anything in the chat. So basically what happens is if there's an error by the bank, so sometimes the bank might have a mistake where they posted something in an incorrect amount. And if that's the case, then you actually would put it on the bank side of the bank rec. You would not do a journal entry for it. It would just be a reconciling item where it's, the bank might have, like it might be a handwritten check and they posted it for the wrong amount. Nowadays, it's getting less likely for that to happen now that they have scanning features at the bank where you don't even type in the amount for the check. It's like an automatic scanning of it. But if it is the case that there's an error by the bank, the process in real life, what you do is you put it on the bank rec as an error by the bank, and then you phone the bank and get them to fix it. So it'll eventually next month, if it was their error, they'll put a correction through your bank. And then next month, once the correction's there, you would take that off your bank rec because it would now be imbalanced. So whenever you're looking at your bank rec, there's some things that are differences that you post a journal entry for, and some things are not. So for the journal entry, we would be doing interest revenue, we'd be doing bank service charges, and we'd be doing automatic payments, and we would do an error in data entry. For the other things, for outstanding checks, outstanding deposits, and errors by the bank, those are just reconciling items on the bank side, and we do not do journal entries to account for those. So that is just a review from your accounting class where you learned about how to do a bank rec. So the other thing I wanted to talk about as a warning when you're doing bank recs is that the first time you're doing a reconciliation for any account, you have to add the prior outstanding amount, even if there are none. So you basically, the idea here is, let's say we never did a bank rec in Sage in the past, but of course we had bank balances and maybe we just did it manually. We hadn't set up reconciliations in Sage. If that's the case, we have to insert our outstanding transactions from last month. So let's say, for example, we're starting reconciliations for January, and in December, there wasn't any in December. Maybe we had a manual bank rec process where we did it just like the old way. Of course, you can do that, where you have the bank rec screen where you just, you could have written it out. You could have done it in Excel where it shows, hey, in December, we had outstanding checks. These are the check numbers. We had outstanding deposits. Then what you're going to do this month in January is you're going to go insert outstanding, and you're going to put in the ones that were outstanding from last month so that you could clear them this month. And even if there's none, like we said, you have to go ahead and still click insert outstanding. And then if there are none, you just click OK from the add outstanding transaction screen. And that would be the case if it's a brand new business and you're doing the bank rec for the first time. Obviously, there would be no prior transactions to add. Whereas if it's an existing company, they would have had outstanding things from last month that you would have to enter. So that's another thing to just watch out for. So any questions on the bank rec process that I've talked about? No? Okay. So another thing, and I already talked about this earlier, but don't post your account rec for the bank rec until the unresolved amount is 0. But a good thing is that you can save your work before posting in the bank rec screen to come back later to resolve and correct. So let's say you're doing a bank rec today and you run out of time. If you think back to when you were doing a journal entry for something, there was no save button. You either post it or you don't. Luckily with this, you can save. So let's say you're working on the bank rec, something doesn't make sense and you don't have time to try to go back and see what you did wrong. You could save it and go back into it tomorrow. So that is a really good benefit for you. So don't worry if you're kind of like, oh, I don't really know if I'm going to have time, you can still at least start the work and go back to it. And that warning is talked about on page 598 when you're going through the textbook. So now I'm going to get into the midterm results. So this is a distribution of the marks, just so you can see. Most people did really, really well. I didn't make the midterm really difficult. I made it to, design to just, I guess, basically show that you learn the material from the textbook. And it was structured in a similar manner to how the textbook was, where you started with an existing company and you entered a selection of transactions for that particular company. So the average, I already sent that out in the email, it was over 82%. So you can see here the distribution. I'm going to go through some of the common mistakes, and I will post the solution journal entries on Moodle. I wanted to talk about the midterm results first before I posted the solution, just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that people did wrong. So one of the most common mistakes was the sales commission. And there was quite a few people that got 100%. So it's not saying that nobody knew how to do this. But basically, whenever you're paying employees commission, you have to pull the sales for each employee to be able to calculate the commission. So a lot of students just went in, calculated sales, and did an equal amount of commission for each salesperson, which is not correct. So in the textbook, if you want to review how to do this, page 343 talks about how you need to add a salesperson to each sales invoice so that the sales will be tracked by person so that you can later on calculate commission. So if you didn't do that when you were doing sales, you wouldn't even be able to calculate commission. But in the case of people that make commission, you will always see in the textbook that it'll say sold by X person so that you can later on calculate commission. And then on page 390 of the textbook, there is an example of the commission calculation, just so that you can look back and see how they did it for that particular one if you're not sure how to do the calculation. And there is a report that you would use. It's called Sales by Salesperson in Sage, and that's the way you would calculate sales by person so you can calculate the commission account. So that's one of the common mistakes that people made. Another one was the bank journal entries. So there's some students that didn't debit the mortgage itself, like the liability account and the bank loan for the principal amounts paid. So for whenever you're making loan payments, the interest portion goes to interest expense, but the actual principal amount would be debiting the liability account. And then the file structure, there was only a couple of mistakes with this because I think, doing it in class and having a practice Dropbox helped students. And I had gave reminders of this in the exam itself, is that you do need to have one zipped folder with your reports and your backup. So some of the common mistakes, I think there was a couple people that did not zip anything and put all the files in. There was one person that didn't even use the file for the exam and tried to create it from scratch. So that really, if you try to start with no company at all, that totally messes up your entire exam. There was a file that you had to download to go in and do it. Some people didn't do the correct reports. So it said to do all of the general ledger. So it should have everything in there. It shouldn't just have, like, I remember one student, it just showed the bank journal entry. And I'm not sure why that happened. And also the other thing to check before you submit your exam, there was one student that didn't actually submit their proper stage file. They submitted the original one. So make sure you do that, because I can't mark some of the stuff that I need. I need to go into Sage to check some of your work. For example, shortcuts. There's no report you can print where I can see your shortcuts, right? I have to actually go into each of your Sage files to do that. So there are certain things I have to do like that. Other things I can check, like if you printed your bank journal, or sorry, if you if you printed the correct report for your income statement and for your journal entries, I could check your work that way, obviously, but other things I cannot. So make sure again that you print the correct reports and that you submit the correct file. And so I think that was about it to talk about. So of course, the other thing is there's only 2 chapters left, and then we're going to be starting on the case. And the case will be basically, again, a file that you'll have access to on Moodle that you'll download, and you'll do or it'll have the instructions on Moodle, I should say. It's not there yet, and you'll be doing a case. So it's with similar to anything that you're doing in the textbook as well, but it's meant for you to, work on a company and do the accounting for the company. So now what I want to do is give time for questions. Now, the other thing I want to talk about for the midterm, I'm going to stop my share. If you have specific questions on the midterm, then you can actually book time with me on Wednesday. So we'll do it a little different. If you have a question, we'll book a specific time. If you want to go through your specific midterm results where you lost marks, then you can book time with me as well. So at the end, if you have a general question about something, and obviously I want to do this on Wednesday only because I haven't given you the solution yet. So what you would want to do is basically go in to the solution and then go into your submission report, if you've submitted the right report, that is. So if you have all your journal entries in a report already, you can compare to the solution, see what you did wrong, and probably you won't need to ask a question at all. If you didn't print a report that included everything, go back into your Sage file that you submitted, print your journal entries all, go into them and match those to the solution. You might be able to actually figure out what you did wrong on your own. But if you can't or you don't know, then certainly you can book time with me and we'll go through it. And if you're thinking that you did everything and you didn't get marks, it might be that you submitted the wrong file. So again, go right into your Moodle for your submission and look at what you actually submitted to make sure that it is actually what you think it was. Because in some cases, somebody might have just submitted a backup halfway through the midterm. I'm not sure if that happened to anybody, but if it did, then I wouldn't have any of that work to be able to mark, right? So again, be very careful when you're submitting that you submit the correct file. So now I know some people had, I know one person had a question. I'm done. I'm going to cancel the recording now, but if anyone has specific questions from the last textbooks, you can ask that now. And other than that, anyone who doesn't have any specific questions, you can go ahead and log out.